Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and director of Thinking the Unthinkable, Mr. Nick Gowing, and editor-in-chief of Deutsche Welle, Ms. Ines Pohl.
Morning.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome, and this is about setting the scene. We're not masters or mistresses of ceremonies. We're here really to get you into the mood of what NATO Engaging is about. Ines and I will be coming back periodically between now and tomorrow evening to reflect with you, to give a reality check of what has been happening, what have we learned, what is NATO still not doing enough of? So you're part of this as well. This is about conversation as much as theatre and those here just talking to you. And Ines and I, in a moment, will just give a couple of reflections on what is outstanding and what you might expect. But I need to explain why you are all here. This is not just about kinetic and weapons. This is about citizens. It's about the public. And that's why it's called NATO Engages. It's about how NATO now engages with an increasingly skeptical and vocal public in so many of the member nations. It's not just the leaders. So you are here as people of influence, people who've been selected, but also you've asked to come here because you want to have a voice. The metrics are important here. 57 countries, 40% women, a third of you are under 35. And that's critical to the future of NATO. So this is a great experiment, really a showing of how NATO needs to change in its public profile and the perceptions of the public. And that's going to be underpinning everything in the next day and a half. That, therefore, is why we're here. We're here to ventilate issues and to engage. We'll be hearing from the Deputy Secretary-General herself in a moment. But Ines, what do you think the issues need to be?
Well, you
on the
pointed
public?
out, I think, the core points, and I'm very excited to really start this dialogue with you. I think we all have been talking a lot about this crucial moment, that this is one of the most, maybe one of the most historic NATO summits since many, many years. So we all really invite you to get involved in the discussion, to talk about the core values. What do we stand for? What is this, the West, in any case? Which role do the United States play, but also the European Union? What really matters? Should we really mainly talk about budget and Donald Trump? Isn't there anything else? So in that regard, I'm very, very happy to welcome the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Rose Gottemoeller, to, well, this is your applause, first of all. It's just fabulous that you take the time to open this 2 days of conversation. Ms. Gottemoeller, how do we get out of this trap to mainly talk about President Trump?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say welcome to you all. You've been welcomed by others, but on behalf of the Secretary General and myself, you'll hear from Jens Stoltenberg a little later this morning. He'll be here to give you a big substantive rundown on what this summit is all about. But I just wanted to say welcome on behalf of our entire alliance, and particularly the international staff and the international military staff. We are the NATO institution, but of course the missions, our 29 missions, also are at the heart of how we get things done. So on our behalf, welcome to you all. Now, to answer your question, you've already made mention, and Nick has made mention of the number of young people in the audience. You know, sometimes us older people, as we say in American English, us old fogies, get stuck on a single topic. And if you've read the media, as all of you have been doing over the last several months, you've been seeing a kind of drumbeat of a particular set of topics, which are extraordinarily important. And you'll be hearing from Secretary General Stoltenberg about defense burden sharing. But the important thing, and this dialogue lets you do it. It lets you range widely. Let's talk about the future of NATO. Let's talk about everything from inclusive security to Afghanistan, from hybrid warfare to the role of new technologies. Let's talk about all those topics that are so important for the future of this alliance. And you, the younger people in the audience, can help us not get stuck on a single topic. So that's my charge to you. Help us not get stuck on a single topic.
Okay, so this is the answer how we not get trapped into only talking about Donald Trump.
well,
let's not only focus on him. That's what you're
saying.
saying.
As the Nike ad says, just do it.
Just do it. We will do it. Thank you very much. We welcome you again and good luck.
I'm not going to leave the stage just yet because I actually have a job to do.
Oh.
And I've got a little cheat sheet here to help me do it. I didn't want to miss anybody out, but I wanted to thank our sponsors who have helped us to put this together. First, I wanted to thank the Munich Security Conference and Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger and his team. I wanted to thank Fred Kemp, the President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and his team. I wanted to thank Karen Dodfried, the President of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and her team. And I wanted to thank Corinne Horst, President of Women in International Security Brussels, and her team for putting this all together. And I cannot end without thanking our own fantastic team under Ambassador Tajem Ildem, who put this together from the NATO side. So with that little advertisement, I'll leave you to it.
Thank you very much indeed.
Can we also thank you as well, because this was born from the Brussels Forum back in March, and you said, let's try and do this at NATO.
Indeed.
How many of us have been to NATO summits where this has happened before? It didn't happen really in Poland, it didn't happen in Newport. So this is about inclusivity and outreach. So thank you very much for bringing us all together.
Thank you. Thank you. See you later. Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
Well, I think we all know now what to do, not focus on a single issue, really go back to the very meaning of NATO.
Anything else you want to stir them with about the definition of the West, for example? Nothing to debate at the moment, but this underpins much of what you need to talk about over the next 36 hours. Indeed, let's move on immediately because we're bang on time with a video about what is the normal. What is the new normal? This is the definition which is coming now from NATO, which are putting it on the agenda. And after that, the first session will begin. Ines, we'll be back from time to time.
Enjoy and get engaged. Okay, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome presenter from Deutsche Welle TV, Mr. Ali Aslan.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're coming to you from Brussels, where I feel the mood, please have a seat, where the mood is still somewhat somber after yesterday's semi-final loss to France. But I think the Red Devils did this country proud. Now, we're trying, I'm not sure if we'll be able to lift up the mood here, but this is certainly what we will try in this very first panel of the day, ladies and gentlemen, framing the debate, a shifting global order and an alliance under pressure. Now, we are going to start this Brussels Summit dialogue at a very high altitude. I couldn't have asked for three better speakers to kick us off. And ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the German Defense Minister, Minister Ursula von der Leyen.
Thank you. Thank you.
He has just been confirmed and reappointed in his previous post. Delighted to welcome him here. The Turkish Foreign Minister, Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu, ladies and gentlemen, is here. And certainly, not last but not least, I'm very delighted to welcome the Polish Foreign Minister, Jacek Czaputowicz, is here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, We will, of course, engage in a very intense debate within the next 45 minutes with your help, of course. But before we do, all three speakers get 2 minutes of introductory short statements. 2 minutes is what the time is. I know it's relatively short, but the more time we have then for the following discussion. Minister von der Leyen, you're up. Your opening statement.
Yes, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. 2 minutes for 3 remarks. First of all, my first remark is NATO gave us way more than only the strongest alliance, military alliance in the world. Because if we look back, the transatlantic security umbrella was an umbrella under which our economies could grow, the economies that are the foundation for our social cohesion. NATO was the security umbrella under which democracies could grow and the rule of law could grow. There was one specific characteristic at the very beginning, in the first decades of NATO, that was American leadership, that was composed of 2 things. American leadership that, yes, had the American interest in its focus, but it was always combined with caring for the Allies' common goods and shaping the topics of the future. And it was President Bush Sr. who saw, in the wake of reunification, when the wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed and Warsaw Pact vanished, that there's a rearrangement of the world. He offered at that time to Europe, as he called it, partnership in leadership. Unfortunately, Europe wasn't able to grasp this opportunity. They hide away. And now we have to learn it the hard way. Second remark, yes, we are having issues among the allies, without any question. Tariffs, climate change, Iran deal, defense spending, we're going to talk about it. But discussions are okay. That's what democracy is all about. The question is, are we going to let these debates weaken our commitment? Or are we keeping up the essential? And the essential are the values I was just talking about. Our opponents would love to see division in NATO. We should not allow that. Our opponents are Russia, China, cyber attacks, populist movements, you know all that. And therefore, my third and last remark is, among the top priority among our security interests is cohesion in NATO. Cohesion in NATO is built up from trust and, of course, capabilities or fair engagement. There is a point the Americans have, a fair point. We have to do more as Europeans. Therefore, we just created the European Defense Union. We just created the European Defense Fund that stops fragmentation. But trust is a very precious thing, too. And the trust is, for example, our engagement in Afghanistan. The very one time that Article 5 was triggered. So I hope the clear message of this summit will be unity and resolve.
Thank you so much. Unity and resolve, reiterating once again the relevance of social cohesion and trust in the alliance. Many things you touched upon. Of course, I'll come back and try to follow up. But first up, I'm delighted now to give the floor to Foreign Minister Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu for his 2-minute introductory statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. When NATO was founded, there were 2 blocks. And more or less, we knew where the threat was coming from and what kind of threat it was. Now it has changed. Now we see similar aggressions from some countries and from some regions. But besides that typical aggression, we see hybrid warfare. And not only hybrid warfare to our allies or alliance, but to the economy as well. Look at the hybrid virus, Petya, causing $2.2 billion only in the 3rd quarter of 2017. And now the main threat, one of the main threats is terrorism. And it's coming from different parts of the world, but we are all target at the same time. And the situation in the regions have also impacts to our region, like a situation in Syria, like Libya, and beyond. And it is not only migratory flows, which has been actually shaking the political and social landscape, particularly Europe, now, but also terrorism and all sorts of terrorism. Therefore, we need to act together, and we need solidarity and unity more than ever to face all these kind of challenges. Let me also emphasize one challenge that European societies and beyond have been facing. This is intolerance, intolerance to others, and hatred. I mean, Islamophobia, Christianophobia, anti-Semitism, and racism, and anti-migrant sentiments. And this negative trend also has been undermining the stability and also political landscape in many European countries now, shaking even the democratically elected government. Of course, NATO cannot do a lot more, to face this challenge, but the member states and the OEC and European Union, Council of Europe, and the other organizations together can also reverse this negative trend, which is undermining the public order as well.
Thank you so much to Foreign Minister Mevlüt. Çavuşoğlu. Again, solidarity and union, cohesion and trust. I see a pattern emerging. I think these are the terms that will be coming up often within the next 48 hours. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to yield the floor to the Polish Foreign Minister for his introductory statement.
Thank you for inviting me to take part in this debate. So let me start by reminding you that Poland joined NATO in 1999. It was 10 years after the end of the Cold War. It was a very good decision, which gave us a feeling of security. But now we all know that there are new challenges, and the most important, these revisionist states, particularly Russia. So we are for reinforcement NATO. Very important decisions were taken at the NATO Summit in Warsaw 2 years ago, forward presence, and it was, now we have to just maintain this decision to reinforce this presence and further strengthen, and it would be my message, to strengthen defense and deterrence capability of NATO. So it is what we expect from this summit. But I must say that last 2 years a lot very important decisions were taken, a lot was done in order to guarantee security for our region. Central and Eastern European countries are threatened by the Russian aggressive policy. Of course, it is policy directed vis-à-vis Ukraine, but we can expect that if Russia continues this aggressive policy, it may threaten also other countries. Like Skripal case shows that also Western democracies could be threatened by these policies. I agree that at that moment, transatlantic unity is crucial for our security. We have to maintain unity and further modernize the alliance for the benefit of all of us.
Thank you so much to the Polish Foreign Minister. Now, Minister von der Leyen, judging by his tweets, Germany is certainly on Donald Trump's mind. He has clearly not just criticized, but even singled out Germany on numerous occasions for not, by his standard, not fulfilling its obligations towards NATO, criticizing Germany for not spending 2% of its GDP on defense, as was agreed in Wales in 2014. We might not say this often, but doesn't the American president have a point here?
Our American friends do have a point. Since 2014, that was the summit in Wales when President Obama and all the allies committed themselves to move towards 2% in a decade later. We have to see where Germany does come from. We came out of a period of 25 years of budget cuts, and then the security arena totally changed. Russia, ISIL, Africa, just to name the buzzwords. At that point, Germany was down to 1.1%. Now we are rising. Since then, we need it for the armed forces desperately. We're rising since then. We just passed the budget for the next year, a rise of 11%. And if I project in 2024, in real terms, we will have a rise in a defense budget of 80%. Why that? Because the GDP is strong. So this is one part of the balance sheet. I think the second part is as important, and I would like to see the businessman, Donald Trump, not only to look at the balance sheet, but also to look at the output. What is the output for NATO? Well, I must say Germany is the second largest troop contributor to NATO overall. We're the second largest net payer. We're just creating the headquarter, Jacek, in modernizing the NATO structure, just to name a few topics. So we are moving in the right direction, but there's still more work to do. We're committed to the 2% goal, and I hope to take my friends along with that commitment.
So the 2% contribution on the part of Germany is coming eventually, is what you're saying?
It is coming. We're moving towards it, but you just have to look at the sums. Where we did come from, the lowest point was very low, and by now we invested a lot. And I would love to see more focus on capabilities, who is giving what kind of capabilities to NATO, and who is engaging, that is contribution, because you can spend 2% on your national defense budget without doing anything for NATO. This doesn't say anything what the output for NATO is, and therefore we have set cash, capabilities and contributions.
And speaking of capabilities, there have been reports that the German military equipment has been somewhat outdated, in some cases not fully operational. So when you talk about German, not just willingness, but also ability to contribute, these reports are false or
no, they are correct, because what I did is complete transparency. I think we are the most transparent armed forces in the world, because I needed that debate after 25 years of budget cuts. This makes something with your armed forces. And we do have partly hollow structures. We need a modernization process, the whole cyber topic. I just started a cyber troop of 14,000 servicemen and servicewomen, only focused on cyber. And this needs investment. And if you want to convince your parliament to raise the budget, you have to be transparent why you need all that money.
All right, thank you so much. Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, now Turkey's contribution to NATO, I believe, is undisputed. To this day, it is still the second largest military in NATO. But there are some who fear that Turkey is drifting away from the alliance, pointing towards Turkey's order of a Russian missile defense system, which evoked a response on the part of Washington saying, unprecedented, if you will, saying, we will impose sanctions on Turkey for ordering the Russian missile defense system. Is it true? Is Turkey moving away from the alliance?
No, Turkey is not moving anywhere else. Turkey is NATO ally. Turkey is part of Europe. And Turkey has been member of many European institutions. And Turkey has been trying to member of European Union for 60 years. And not only when we buy S-400, Turkey is questioned, but when I reach Middle East, when I go to Central Asia, when I go to Latin America, or opening up African policy has been questioned by our Western friends. And they want to stay only at the door of Europe, European Union. They don't want us to go anywhere else. But Turkey, Ukraine, and the countries living in our geography has to balance their foreign policy. And we don't have to choose between this and that. And we don't see our good relations with any country or any region as an alternative to others. Let's come back to S-400. We have urgent needs, and I have to meet it. And I have to cover my airspace. I have to protect that. Forget about the missiles in the region. Even terrorist organizations have missiles and rockets. And I tried to buy from my allies. I wanted to buy from US for last 10 years. It didn't work. I wanted to buy from other countries. Forget about the air defense system. Now Germany is also trying to block the needs that we are buying from. We need to buy from Germany. So I had to buy, and I couldn't get it from my NATO allies. So Russia gave me the best proposal, and now I am buying from Russia.
But you understand the signal that might send to some members within the alliance?
No, this is, I can understand the concern. The key issue is here. The S-400 system shouldn't see NATO and NATO systems as enemy. This is the key issue. And we are more vigilant and sensitive than any other NATO allies on this issue. And like S-300 that Greece has, those systems don't see NATO allies as enemy. So in this case, I signed a MOU with Eurosam, which is French and Italian consortium. But this is a midterm and long-term project. It's a joint production. And now there is a threat at my borders. Only Italian SEMTI is there, and also Spanish batteries there. And even Germany withdrew their batteries from my border. So who is going to protect my air space and my borders? In this case, Turkey is a sovereign country. Yes, we are NATO ally, but I have to take measures to make sure that we cover our airspace and we protect our airspace.
So the ordering of the...
And I don't believe in the sanctions. If there is any sanction coming from any country, and obviously Turkey will reciprocate. And sanctions didn't work. Sanctions didn't work with Iran. Sanctions didn't work with Russia. And I see that EU actually decides sanctions on Iran or Russia. I see the key EU member states have been violating that. Who are the best trade partner of Iran? France, Germany, and Italy. Who are doing good trade with Russia? Obviously, it is very clear.
All right. So the ordering of the Russian missile defense system is not a sign of Turkey drifting away from the alliance. But speaking of Russia, Foreign Minister Czaputowicz, in the midst of the rift between Germany and the US, you have proposed, your government has proposed that you would be willing to spend up to $2 billion to entice the US to move its forces from Germany to Poland to build a permanent military base there. You know that such a move would provoke an outcry from Russia, don't you? Do you think at this particular point that we have, and amid the changing security environment, do you think it would be a wide move to move the US forces from Germany to Poland at this particular point?
We are talking probably about different proposals. We never proposed to move American forces from Germany to Poland. We just wanted to make American forces stationing in Poland permanent and increased, but not to the detriment of Germany. It was never on the table. So generally, we would like to increase military presence of our allies, particularly American ally in Poland, because it will strengthen the deterrence of the whole alliance. That's right. There is a discussion concerning the reaction of Russia, but we argue that Russia brought any international commitments invading Ukraine and with annexation of Crimea. So we have to simply defend ourselves. And all decisions taken by the alliance in Wales, in Warsaw, and hopefully here in Brussels, is the reaction to this new threat. We would like to strongly cooperate with Germany in the field of military, in the production, and we see American troops stationing in Germany as a support also for us, for our security. So it is not an alternative. It is not our proposal, at least.
But the reaction on the part of Russia, and you have alluded to it, would be inevitable. Do you think?
No, already reaction is quite negative. So they criticize, they mobilize their military forces on the border already, but we have to react to their aggressive policy. So I think that the dual-track policy of NATO, which is just to maintain sanctions and to signal to Russia that the Western world, democratic world, will not accept breaching of international order is very important. And also we have to think about Ukraine. Poland strongly supports territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we have to support that country, and we have to ask them. We cannot think only about our own security, I mean particularly Western countries. Threat perception in Poland, Baltic states is different than in France or Germany, so we are aware of that fact, and particularly Georgia and Ukraine. So we have to counter aggressive policy of Russia. So this is the main challenge for NATO these days.
These days, a lot of challenges for NATO these days, that's for certain. Minister von der Leyen, you stressed and emphasized unity and cohesion. Many Americans, though, see the launch of the Permanent Structured Cooperation, PESCO, which pools, of course, the defense efforts of 25 EU states, not as a supplementary, but as in competition with NATO. They see this initiative as a threat to the alliance. What would you respond and reply to your American counterpart?
Well, I would say, look at me. I'm the defense minister of Germany. I have my NATO hat on. I have my European Union hat on, European Defense Union. I have one single set of forces. I would be crazy to compete with myself. So, therefore, it's in our utmost interest to be complementary to NATO. We have been always asked, the Europeans, and rightly so, by our American or Canadian friends, for example, to strengthen the European pillar. That's what we're doing now. And if you look at the numbers, we have 20 countries that are NATO members as well as PESCO members. They have the same interest as I have, one single set of forces, no competition but complementarity. And the second thing I would say to the one who would ask me is, you know, there are tasks for NATO. NATO will always be collective defense, always. But there are other problems around Europe where I do not see NATO. For example, stabilize countries in Africa, our immediate neighbor. This is a European task where Europe has to be not only with military means, but also with economic development, with diplomacy, this whole bunch of comprehensive security that is needed there. This is an original European task, and for that we need procedures and structures. That's what the European Defence Union is for.
So clearly not in competition, but rather, if you will, reducing the reliance on the Americans.
Well, it's even the other way around. If you look, for example, at military mobility now, a big issue in NATO. Where do we have to fulfill military mobility? In Europe. Therefore, we just had it on the European Council as a European task to make military mobility possible. And now, with the result from the European Council, we have the pledge here at the NATO Summit. And therefore, you see, it's in NATO's interest that Europe gets organized in defense matters.
Before I get the audience involved, we're meeting here obviously amid very interesting times, Defense Minister. You've been at it for a very long time, very experienced Defense Minister. The shape of NATO, the very current state of shape. Are you concerned? Are you concerned about the future of the alliance?
I'm not concerned about the future of the alliance, but I realize, because there are so many debates, and I will not go in details because it takes too much time, that yes, we're worried, but on the other hand, we start to realize how precious this NATO alliance is. And that's the same values we are fighting for. And if you look at these values, democracy, rule of law, multilateral order, this is not a given. If we do not stand up for it, nobody else will stand up for it. And therefore, we have to invest even more in NATO. We have to communicate about NATO. We have to convince ourselves and our friends that it's worth to strengthen this NATO alliance.
Minister Çavuşoğlu, looking at NATO today, what shape, what state is the alliance in? How would you characterize it?
Well, I was trying to explain what kind of threat that NATO and alliance have been facing. Therefore, today, for instance, the main threat is coming from terrorist organizations and from different parts of the world. Therefore, the solidarity and unity is more important than ever. And it is so wise that NATO is going to have a base in Iraq to train the forces, Iraqi forces. And eventually, we also advise that NATO could also go to Libya to train the local forces. Of course, Libya has been facing other problems. I hope we can reach a political solution over there. Therefore, the solidarity is important, but without any double standard. Some of the NATO allies, for instance, supporting some of the terrorist organizations or working together with some of the terrorist organizations. Can you imagine now in NATO?
Could you be more specific?
We have been always discussing between ourselves how to counterbalance Russia in here or there. But in Syria, for instance, United States and Russia were competing each other to control PKK, YPG terrorist organization, even though they both know that they are the same terrorist organization. Now Russia understood that this is really a terrorist organization, so they cannot control, and they don't deal with YPG, PKK. But now together with US, for instance, we are trying to clean Münbic from YPG and PKK. But how come they enter the Münbic? How come they control 25% of the territory of Syria? And they are destabilizing all this region. And they force even other Kurds to leave these areas. And we are hosting now 400 Syrian Kurds. And most of them were forced by YPG, PKK terrorist organization. And therefore, we need to avoid double standards when we are dealing all these sensitive issues and we are challenging the terrorism and the others.
For Mr. Czaputowicz, what state is NATO in at the moment? How do you evaluate the current shape of the alliance?
I think that it is under the process of transformation in order to meet new challenges, the biggest one since the end of the Cold War. Generally, we assess very positively. But for us, NATO, it is first of all transatlantic unity. NATO differs from the European Union by presence of the United States. It's obvious. And only United States can guarantee security for countries like Poland on the eastern flank. We are for cooperation between European Union. We are not against. We support very much preparation within the European Union to build complementary units to face challenges from the south. But at the same time, for us, it is a military challenge, which is the most important. We differ within the European Union by our geopolitical location. On the eastern flank, countries face different challenges. So we are for strengthening NATO, and we hope we will maintain this unity. However, at the same time, there is a concern, as it was mentioned. There are differences between the European Union. When I meet my colleagues, foreign ministers, the Council of Foreign Ministers of the European Union, we discuss issues like Iran, for example, and we differ, European Union generally and United States. What policy should be taken vis-à-vis Iran or trade relations? It is not a good situation for Poland because we would like to have both strong European Union and transatlantic unity, very good relations with the United States. Therefore, our policy within the European Union is be there, but at the same time call for discussion with the United States. It's a cornerstone of our foreign policy.
Mr. von der Leyen, the US president is conducting a somewhat unconventional style, if you will, in politics. The G7 summit, for instance, ended in somewhat of a disarray. Do you fear that at the end of this NATO summit, we're going to have the same picture? Do you fear that we might have disagreement, open disagreement at the end of these 2 days between the US and the rest of the alliance?
Well, we all 29, we should not only reduce it to one and the rest. We all 29 worked very hard for this NATO summit. And this is, I have seen quite a lot of NATO summits by now. So this is the most substantial I've seen so far. So there's a lot on the table. And I'll do my very best, and I know that our friends will do their very best to go in depth in the topics and to debate about what we have on the table so that we have at the very end a successful summit. That's our goal.
Why is it the most substantial in your view?
Because if you look at what is on the table, what we've progressed, for example, since Wales, the mission in Iraq we're starting, the modernizing of the NATO structure, command structure, for example, there's a lot on the table. So the different perspectives on the east, but also on the south, we have on the table. So if you look at the communiqué, there is a lot of substance, and we can be proud of it. So we should really talk in depth about the topics and not only focus on one single topic.
So a lot on the table, ladies and gentlemen. I think that much is for certain. Very curious how the discussions will play out. Now I would like to bring you in and give you the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. Let me stress this. The emphasis is on question. We have just a short amount of time left, so I would very much ask you to be brief. I think we have microphones around the table. First one, can we get a microphone right here to Thomas Brockhoff from the German Marshall Fund? Please pass the microphone. And even though I have done it already, please introduce yourself again.
Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff, German Marshall Fund. Question to Minister von der Leyen. You have mentioned that Germany stands by the 2% goal. Can you please tell us when Germany will reach 2%?
If you can tell me how the GDP is beyond 224, I can tell you exactly what it is. But as it is in relation to the GDP, you see the problem to project it in the future. What we can say for sure is that we will spend 1.5% in 2024. And as I said, it's a rise of 80% within a decade. Show me another country who has managed that.
Do you feel unfairly singled out?
No, we're almost used to that by now. We can cope with that. Because, as I said, there's a fair point in it. But I stress the other part, and that's a good thing about it, to debate about who's doing what for NATO. And I would like and ask you to look at the second and the third metric, capabilities and commitments. It changes the picture.
All right, thank you. So the Germans are used to the criticism by now. Next question, please.
Greetings. Irakli Alessania, former Minister of Defense of Georgia. I want to take you back 10 years ago. There was a Bucharest summit. And there was a decision on NATO about Georgia and Ukraine, not to give the MAP, but eventually have the membership in the air. It looked like an invitation for Russians to go in both countries. Do you regret this decision, that not giving MAP to Georgia? And what do you think, when the appetite of another expansion of NATO will come? Thank you.
Right, thank you. The question was to anyone? To the three? Please, Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu.
As Turkey, we fully support the enlargement, NATO's enlargement policy, and we believe that Georgia, Macedonia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina should be included to alliance as soon as possible. And I understand your disappointment, and I agree with you. And this is one of the problems actually in NATO, the different positions from different countries about Georgia's membership or activating the map, as well as the membership of other two aspirant countries. And therefore, we fully support, and this is one of the priority of Turkey and the NATO, and we will emphasize this during this summit as well.
Foreign Minister Czaputowicz, the gentleman from Georgia, picking up on what you alluded to already.
Yeah, that's very important. I think that Poland always supported membership of Georgia and Ukraine, other countries in NATO. I think that we should keep open door within NATO. It is a policy. But I think, and I would like to refer to your questions concerning Russian aggressive policy. I think it was a mistake made by European countries in 2008. Nord Stream 1 provided resources for Russia to modernize the army. And Russia did it, simply modernized the army, invaded Georgia, then Ukraine, currently plays very negative role in Syria. I do not agree with you. I think that there are Western positions there, and Russia supporting Assad, it is a very negative role there. Skripal case and so on. It was a mistake of Western states. We were very much against of maintaining strong economic ties with Russia because we thought it will be very aggressive policy in the future. Now we are discussing about Nord Stream 2, another mistake, and you may ask in 10 years' time at this kind of meeting, why we did not react. But it is not our position. It is a position of other countries within the European Union, which would like to continue building Nord Stream 2. Even most of countries are against, and the United States see the problem. We should counter, rather, Russia until it changes its aggressive policy.
You can tell the temperature in the room is rising. All speakers have stood up at this particular point, trying to feel it chiming in. So I just want to allude you, I've already seen 20, 30 hands up. It's impossible for you to get in, so apologies up front. We only have 9 minutes left before the Canadian Prime Minister comes on stage. The lady is up next. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Ursula. I'm from the European Commission and from Finland. And I just wanted to ask, because Trump has just said that at the NATO summit that Germany is captive of Russia. So how would you react
Germany
on
is
that?
what, please?
Captive of Russia.
Russia. Captive. You are
Captive?
taken by Russia. Yeah.
Captive of Russia.
This was this morning?
He just came in Twitter.
So he's awake. Okay. Okay. So we should be... it should be interesting.
I do not really understand what he means by that. Hard to say. But in general, yes, if there's a country in the region who has seen the change in Russian behavior, then it is Europe, and within Europe it is Germany, of course. On the other hand, I hope that the President will go with a strong signal of resolve and unity from this summit to his meeting with President Putin. It's good that the two of them are talking together, because if I look, for example, at our Chancellor, she's talking since 13 years on a regular basis with the Russian President. We have a lot of issues with Russia, without any doubt. But on the other hand, you should keep a communication line between countries or alliances and opponents, without any question. Right. So I'm curious to listen in depth in the meeting what the American president is meaning by that.
And we have 7 more minutes for new tweets to come in throughout the session. Please go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Mingus Campbell. I'm from the United Kingdom, and I'm a vice president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I hope our Turkish colleague will forgive me if I say that his explanation for the purchase of a Russian surface-to-air missile system is unconvincing. And I wonder the extent to which the government of Turkey, taking that decision, took account of the political significance of such a purchase against the background of the fact that Mr. Putin is determined to undermine NATO. He did so, if you like, just a few days ago by rehearsing the notion of a security structure for Europe, right, which did not involve the retention of NATO.
All right.
What better way in which to undermine NATO than to begin to sell members of NATO Russian equipment?
All right.
Well, first of all, we have good relations with Russia, but we disagree with Russia on many issues, including Russia's role in Syria and his support to Assad, as my dear colleague mentioned. And many of you already forgotten Crimea, but we are against the illegal annexation of Crimea, and we fully support the territorial integrity of Georgia as well, and many European countries stopped supporting Georgia's territorial integrity. So we don't agree with Russia on everything. This is not a political decision. As I mentioned, it is my urgent need. Who is going to meet that? Now NATO is able to cover only 30% of my airspace. And who is going to protect my nation, my people, from the missiles coming from regime or from any other countries? Can you do that as UK? You are one of best friends and one of our best allies. I tried to buy from UK, I tried to buy from France, also from United States. And now Trump promises that they can easily sell Patriots to Turkey. But when we ask Congress, it's not like that. It's vice versa. So who is going to protect my airspace? Can you guarantee me? And Germany withdraw their Patriots, and so other countries, and only Spanish
time.
And yes,
excuse me, dear colleague.
I have to say that.
Yes, excuse me, dear
colleague. But who is going to protect my airspace? It is my urgent need, and I try to buy from many other countries, including China. But I get the best deal from Russia, and I bought it. Turkey is a sovereign country, and Turkey can give its own decisions. Right. So, but it is very technical, not political.
Let's give Defense Secretary...
Just for the archives, because it's the second time now.
Yes.
We were very happy at Kahramanmaraş, and thank you for being a very good host nation. We were in a rotational scheme, and Germany was there for 3 or 4 years, which is a lot. And then other followed, you know, the Dutch, the Spanish. So this is within a rotational scheme that we were, as all the allies, protecting a critical border. But you cannot say we withdrew, but we were there for...
Spain and Italy has been prolonging, like real allies.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's... listen, I'm a German citizen.
No, I'm very frank and open. I have to say this.
For a minister, I'm a German citizen of Turkish descent. You're putting me in a very tough spot here. Thank you.
Don't say this.
Thank you.
Don't say this. You know what happened to Mesut Özil and İlkay?
Ladies and gentlemen, we have 3 minutes left, and I would like to dedicate the remainder of the 3 minutes for some closing remarks, starting in the reverse order this time for Mr. Czaputowicz. From your point of view, you feel that NATO is going to remain relevant in the future? I can already sense what the biggest threat from your perspective is. Is NATO equipped to handle that?
I think, yes, if we take good decisions, I am positive we will at that summit, so it will remain the relevant organizations, main organizations providing security for the European continent. I'm thinking about this tweet presented recently by President of the United States. There is something behind the security scene, this tension between Germany and United States, relating rather to trade issues, not to security. It is not good, but we have to also understand, and I try to understand American policy saying that the relations between Russia and some European countries, or Germany, are maybe too close, and they are not taken into consideration by our German partner, colleague, our security threat. Concerning Nord Stream 2, for example, to be captive, it's too strong, but to become dependent and give a possibility to Russia to develop its military and then conduct aggressive policy, it is something in that.
All right, thank you so much. Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, looking ahead, not just towards the next 48 hours, but the next few months, and yes, the future of NATO, how relevant do you think it will remain?
Well, NATO is relevant, and Turkey will contribute to NATO activities. And in the future, when we see the threats and challenges that NATO and allies have been facing, NATO will continue to be very relevant, not only militarily but also politically relevant. But NATO should adapt itself to the future. And NATO-EU relations is important, enlargement is important, and also counterparting terrorism, fighting terrorism is important. Therefore, we need to adapt ourselves to the future as well, and the new developments.
NATO needs to adapt itself to future challenges. Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen, the future of NATO, you remain optimistic?
We have to work hard for that. My father was 15 years old when the war ended. He worked all his life to build up the European Union and to strengthen the German-American and European-American friendship, which is NATO. I'm almost 60 years old. I realize, I always took that for granted as a given. I realize it's up to our generation now to renew that, because I want my children in 50 years to live under the security umbrella of NATO in a democracy, and that's worth fighting for it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please. Framing the debate, a shifting global order and an alliance under pressure, I think we did frame the debate. If anyone was sleepy before, you're surely awake now. I can assure you that. NATO Engages, the Brussels Summit Dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me and join me in thanking these wonderful speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please. Do you leave this?
We walk out. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the German Marshall Fund, Dr. Karen Domfried.
Good morning, and a warm welcome to everybody in the room. I have the great privilege of welcoming to the NATO Engages stage Canada's Dream Team, led by Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who is joined by Foreign Minister Freeland and Defense Minister Sajjan. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Now, we know that Canada has participated in every NATO operation since the founding of the alliance almost 70 years ago. I followed with interest your visit to Latvia yesterday, where you announced that Canada would be contributing additional troops and also extending the stay of those troops in Latvia for another 4 years until 2023 as part of NATO's mission to deter potential Russian aggression. The success of NATO rests both on shared interests, but also very importantly on our belief in common values. And I'd love to ask you to start by sharing with all of us your view of why NATO is vital to Canada's security and why you see the alliance as relevant to our 21st century challenges.
Yeah. No, thank you, Karen, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to engage this morning. I think we have to remember a little bit why and how NATO came into being. NATO exists and existed because the great democracies had just countered communism and fascism, and it remained as was an ongoing existence of pushing back against communism. But it's about enhancing and protecting the democratic principles that we all hold as our core values. And that is something that continues to be as relevant as it ever has been. How we help burgeoning democracies like Latvia. I mean, as you mentioned, I was there yesterday, and it was extraordinary to see how one of the things we don't talk enough about NATO is what happens when diversity of voices from within NATO come together. I mean, the battle group that Canada is leading for Operation Reassurance for the Enhanced Forward Presence is the most diverse in terms of nations. There's about 7 or 8 different nations coming together, and not just side by side, but integrated with each other. And the learning that we do and the opportunity to grow together and reinforce those shared values in a way that is tangible and real while supporting the Baltic states is an extraordinarily important thing beyond just the military combat capacities. It's about remembering that we stand together in very important ways. And as you say, we were glad to extend our mission for another 4 years to continue with Canada's leadership on this. And that actually brings me to another announcement. that Canada is proud to be making. We are going to be looking with great interest this afternoon as NATO announces that we are going to engage in Iraq as an alliance, capacity building, training, that next step in the challenge in Iraq, which was first defeating Daesh, and now we have to rebuild that democracy and strengthen it. NATO is going to take a significant role in that, and Canada is going to commit 250 troops, a number of helicopters, and we're actually offering to command that mission for the first year. This is something that we believe in deeply. And your question, Karen, was about, how does this matter for Canada's security? Well, Canada knows that a peaceful world, a more resilient world, a more democratic world is good for Canada and it's good for all of us. And that's why we believe so deeply in NATO. That's why we stand so strongly with the Transatlantic Alliance. And we'll continue to step up everywhere we can. As you said, we've been in every mission, not because of any other reason than we believe deeply in the values that we're putting forward. And we know that NATO is as necessary now as it was in the height of the Cold War. It's as necessary now to promote the peace, security, and strength of our true democracies and those democratic principles, which are under threat everywhere around the world, it seems. This is a moment for us to stand together and understand that the perspective that we fight for and stand for is essential today and tomorrow.
Well, thank you so much for making news here in this tent with the announcement about Iraq. That's really terrific news, and for that inspiring endorsement of the alliance. And Minister Freeland, I noticed that last month you received Foreign Policy's Diplomat of the Year award, so congratulations. And I read—
That would be a surprise to my husband and children, but—
No, it's wonderful. And I read with interest the speech you gave there. And you focused on a key challenge that we're facing, which the Prime Minister also just referenced. And I want to quote you. You talked about the weakening of the rules-based international order and the threat that resurgent authoritarianism poses to liberal democracy itself. And after the speech, you were talking with reporters and you said, I believe very strongly that it's important for those of us who believe in liberal democracy to strike back. As you know, there are concerns about rising illiberalism in NATO countries. And just to follow up on the Prime Minister's remarks, NATO is an alliance that's based on shared values. So if Canada is committed to the rules-based order, how does NATO fit into that frame?
Well, Canada is, there's nothing conditional about it, Karen. Canada is 100% committed to the international rules-based order, and not just because it sounds good in a room like this, but because we need that international rules-based order to survive and thrive in a really big world. You know, Canada is a big country geographically. We're the 10th largest economy in the world, but there's only 36 million Canadians. And we understand very profoundly that that framework of a rules-based international order is essential for us. On the point about liberal democracy, Karen, and the Prime Minister has already addressed it, I think it is important. It is important for those of us who believe in liberal democracy, and I hope that's everybody in this room, to be proud of that. And, you know, to understand that, yes, you know, populism, nativism even, authoritarianism, they are resurgent in very many parts of the world, even in countries that had seemed to be successful democracies. Some of them seem to be moving backwards. And I think those of us who believe in liberal democracy have to talk about why we hold our values, why our values work. And I think it is absolutely relevant to the NATO discussion. You know, for me, I was thinking about it on the way here, and as the Prime Minister said, we were in Latvia. You know, in a way, the NATO discussion shouldn't happen principally in a room like this, or even in a meeting of our leaders. NATO is not chiefly an alliance of heads of state. NATO is an alliance of all the citizens of all of our countries who are collectively pledged to support each other. NATO really has to start at home if it is going to be an alliance that has legitimacy moving forward. And NATO, these kinds of conversations should be the kinds of conversations that we have, and I do have them. We celebrated Canada Day just over a week ago, and at the barbecue in my neighborhood, in my constituency, believe it or not, a lot of people were talking to me about NATO and the rules-based order. And the Prime Minister talked about how we've just come from Latvia, where we visited the Canadian women and men in uniform in Latvia serving an enhanced forward presence. And I have to tell you, like people, think tankers here, you'll remember a few years ago, the big question was, how does NATO remain relevant? Remember all those papers people wrote about that? How does it remain relevant in the 21st century? I can tell you, in Latvia, it is extremely clear to people the relevance of NATO. That is not an abstract philosophical question. And probably the best conversation I had was with a former comrade at arms of Harges who served with our Minister of Defense when he was serving in Afghanistan. And she's an amazing Canadian woman. She was just finishing a 6-month rotation in Latvia. We talked about her family. She had a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And that's hard, right? She's been away from her kids for 6 months. And I asked her how she explains to her kids what she's doing and why she has to be away for so long. And she said, I told my kids that there's a big bully who is threatening our friends. Russia is threatening our friends. And I explained to them that I tell them that in the schoolyard they have to stand up for their friends if their friends face a bully. And I said, that's what your mom is doing. Your mom is standing up for Canada's friends. And I think that's a beautiful explanation. And we have to make clear to real, regular people, not that any of us are androids, but to people who don't spend their days thinking about NATO, why this really matters.
But I do love this idea of NATO barbecues, right? If everyone in this room starts having barbecues where we talk about NATO, that could have a big public diplomacy impact. But, Minister Sajjan, we've hit on some core principles of why NATO matters. But in all likelihood, this NATO summit will focus on burden sharing. And that's because the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has focused so particularly on the issue of progress that NATO member states who are not yet spending 2% of their GDP on defense, when will they get there? And it reportedly, though Canada is, of course, increasing its defense spending, it isn't at 2%. And reportedly, Canada received a letter from President Trump that was quite sharply worded. Canada wasn't alone in that. Many other NATO countries received a similar letter where Canada was criticized for not spending enough on its own defense and warning that Americans are losing patience with Canada's failure to share NATO's collective security burden. And I would very much appreciate hearing your perspective on this subject.
No, thank you, Karen. And first of all, I just want to give a shout out to all our NATO troops who are doing tremendous work on our behalf of our countries around the world. And we were just able to meet not only our Canadian Armed Forces members, but many of the many nations who are taking part the battle group in Latvia, and how well they're working together. And it sends a tremendous message of interoperability and unity and of deterrence. And we are facing challenges around the world to our threats to a rules-based order, whether it's from a counterterrorism perspective, whether it's Daesh, the migrant crisis. And because of those challenges, NATO is also stepping up, and hence the reason why many of our nations have done our assessments on how are we going to contribute. And the Prime Minister gave me a very strong mandate to conduct a very thorough defense policy review so that we can determine what is needed for Canada and how Canada is going to contribute. And there's a reason why our defense policy now is called Strong at Home, secure in North America, and engaged in the world. Because we also have to make sure that we look after our citizens, our North American defense with our very important ally, the US, as part of our very unique command of the binational command, which is NORAD, so that we're secure in North America, but also our engagement in the world. And Canada will always do its part. We've been part of every mission. But to making sure that we have the right capabilities. So we went through a very thorough assessment, not only talking to experts, but our allies, but more importantly, talking to Canadians. And it is very relevant to Canadians, the importance of NATO. And there's a very strong message from Canadians of Canada playing its part. But Canada also needs to play its part in a meaningful role. It can't be just a check in the box. All of us coming together, as Christia said, this is about countries coming together, bringing our collective experience. And that's what we are doing. So when we talk about the enhanced force presence, this is about nations that are coming together, but making sure we have the right capability to support one another. And in Canada's role here, we are making a very significant contribution into our defense, a 70% increase in the next 10 years, which is going to modernize all our three services, including our special forces, but more importantly, not only the roles so that they can play, it's making sure that our women and men in our forces can actually make that meaningful contribution, and we are seeing that. So whether it's in Europe, whether it's our naval task force that we have committed to, whether it's our air policing, but let's not forget some of the other challenges that we are facing together, and particularly very excited about the mission and how is it evolved. We have defeated Daesh on the ground in Iraq. But now this is about capacity building and training, making sure we have the right leadership. And we will always offer up where Canada can contribute. Hence one of the reasons why this announcement is very important, about sending a very strong message of unity, because we do have challenges to face.
So what I hear you saying is the input metric is important, but let's also look at the output. And absolutely. Canada's contribution across NATO's history and now this new contribution in Iraq is a very clear example of that. And I do now want to open it up to all of you. So please, I'll try to get in as many questions as I can, but we'll start right here. Okay. And please just introduce yourself and, yeah.
I'm chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Latvia. So once again, thank you for what you've done. My question is not about NATO, but the European Union. Would you agree that the EU is an equally important partner in the transatlantic relationship? And would you think PESCO or any other EU activities to promote greater cooperation on defense are a threat to NATO or to what Canada's doing, or is it a complement?
I think European Union matters significantly. I mean, Canada has been very pleased over the past couple of years to have concluded a landmark progressive trade deal with the European Union in CETA. At a time where trade deals aren't necessarily particularly popular around the world, we're actually signing stronger trade deals with Europe. We did one with Asia with the CPTPP. We're working on renegotiating NAFTA and keeping our fingers crossed on that one, but we are actually moving in the right direction on that. But Europe is a valuable and important partner, not just to Canada, but to the world. I think there's a lot of interesting conversations that the Europeans are rightly having about their responsibilities around defense through the European Union. I think our big concern is there not be overlap with what NATO is doing. I think real clarity on what NATO is and what the European Union can specifically do more of is quite frankly a welcome conversation. I think there is really a time for countries of similar values, approaches, and democratic principles to look for all the different ways and levels that we can work together well, because we know that there are a lot of forces, some explicit, some more subtle, that are trying to degrade or break up the kinds of alliances that have led to unparalleled peace and prosperity around the world over the past 70 or so years.
And if anyone else wants to jump in, just signal to me.
Let's try and get as many questions as we can.
And yes, please.
Radmila Shekerinska, Defense Minister of Macedonia. I wanted just to ask an additional question following the comment about liberal democracy. I think that Macedonia is an example that autocratic rulers can seem to be very stable and strong, but that crisis is looming behind. And I think it's also an example that liberal democracy can fight back, and it can create new hope for democracy, rule of law, media freedom, and also cohesion in a very diverse region and country. But I also think Macedonia is an example that NATO honors its words. And the decision that we expect today, the offer of an invitation to join NATO, is an example for other countries in the region and elsewhere. So I would like to hear your views about how the enlargement in NATO should continue and how some of the other countries that have voiced their concerns can predict the future of NATO allies. And finally, let me thank Canada for its steadfast support for our NATO membership. Thank you.
Well, I think that's all really, really well said. And I think we should all really congratulate Macedonia on the tremendous work you guys have been doing in a difficult neighborhood, in difficult circumstances. And I think the point also about the brittleness of authoritarian regimes is very, very well made. I began my professional life as a journalist covering the collapse of the Soviet Union. And actually, one of the stories that I wrote was covering the famous Chicken Kiev speech in August of 1991. And a few weeks after that speech, that was a speech about saying the Soviet Union needs to stay together, given in Kyiv. And a few weeks later, the Soviet Union fell apart. So it's a very important point for us to bear in mind. Authoritarian regimes can seem so strong and so implacable, but they're also very, very brittle. In terms of a path forward for membership, I think that's also really important. And one of the strengths of, I would say, NATO overall, but even more broadly, I would add the EU to that mix, and I would say the whole idea of the transatlantic alliance is this was about creating an international rules-based order with liberal democratic values that was not a closed club, that was open to membership for people and countries aspiring to share those values. And I think that openness needs to be one of our core values as a group, and we need to be true to that value.
Please, right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Iskandar Akalbayev, and I'm coming from Kazakhstan. I'm also part of the Atlantic Council Millennium Leadership Program. So my question is actually basic. So what is your kind of prediction? How do you see the future development of NATO? And I think sometimes we do not speak about one of the greatest assets of NATO is their global partnership around the world. And how do you view the global partnership of NATO in Asia specifically?
Heard you on that?
No, thank you, Prime Minister. I think it's very important. When I was just recently at the Shangri-La Dialogue and talking about the challenges, again, whether we talk about NATO and some of the challenges that we face and we work together, but we collectively as nations also are working together in dealing with some of the challenges there. For example, I'll give you an example. So some of the work that's happening in the Middle East, especially in Iraq, when dealing with Daesh, we have to be mindful of the displacement that occurs with some of the foreign fighters. So we are working together to making sure that are we putting the right tools in place to be able to monitor some of this, to prevent cells being created in other places, and especially in places like the Asia Pacific. So we are doing our part. And I'll give you Canada's approach to this. We, in the past, haven't had a consistent engagement in the Asia Pacific, but now we do. We do have a consistent engagement. We do capacity building in the area with our partners as well. So this is not about when you see a challenge, everybody wanted to jump in. This is about looking at, if there's a challenge, analyze it, and look at which nation's experience can be best suited. And that's the approach that we're taking, and that's the approach that we're taking for Asia Pacific.
Super, thanks.
Thank you. Christian Schmidt, Member of Parliament, Germany. And this is, yeah, it's very, very impressive to hear your report about Latvia. And I think this enhanced forward presence is indeed one of a very, very strong signal that NATO wants to have a unique zone of common responsibility and security. My question is, knowing that this is a very strong symbol, that symbols are not the end of politics and the end of situations. We talked, and you talked in Wales about the necessity to have some deployability in case of developments. This we talk about infrastructure, but we talk as well about capabilities being prepared to be deployable in due time. Do you see that there should be, is all work done nationally and in NATO level, or what you expect that there has to be more enhanced commitment?
No, I mean, I agree entirely. I mean, the symbolism of us standing together is extremely important, but that's ultimately not what it's about. Before the advanced forward presence, there was a real risk that what happened in Crimea could happen somewhere else. And the Baltic states would not be able to stand against a Crimea-like event. The fact is now, with the enhanced forward presence, that could not happen. We have actually demonstrated capacity and presence in a tangible, concrete, real way that means that that is no longer the risk that it was just a few years ago. And that's what we have to remember, that as much as it's nice to come around and talk about values and principles, unless we're willing to step up and stand for them, that doesn't really mean a whole lot in the face of authoritarianism or backsliding democracies or the strong-arm tactics that we're increasingly seeing in different places around the world. That's where NATO actually really deeply matters. And yes, a lot of people talk about the 2%. But Karen, as you said, one of the things we're trying to do as a government over the past 2.5 years is get away from the kinds of announcements that governments used to make, which is, we're spending $20 million on this program, we're spending $100 million on that program, and thinking that that's all you have to do to announce. Announcing money put in, announcing inputs, isn't nearly as important as demonstrating outputs. And we're trying to shift our government's approach around deliverology, around actually looking at metrics. No, we've created this many jobs, or these many children are out of poverty, 300,000 are out of poverty because of our Canada Child Benefit. So we're looking at the actual metrics. And when we talk about 2%, and Canada's very proud to be increasing by 70% over the next 10 years our investments in our military, we also don't just talk about the cost, we talk about the capability and we talk about the contributions. Well, in terms of capability, there's a 20% metric that Canada is up to about 35%. We are significantly investing, getting new fighter jets, getting new surface combatants for our Navy, investing significantly in our military in very real and tangible ways so we can continue to deploy around the world. But also comes to commitments, an ability and a consistency in being there and stepping up regularly in tangible ways. This mission we're taking on in Iraq, which is an extension of what we've been doing within the coalition, that's moving into that next phase of how do we help in governance, how do we build institutions and capacity in Iraq to make sure that it stands as a fledgling democracy that becomes stronger and stronger. Those sorts of tangible elements are at the heart of what NATO stands for. I mean, you can try and be a bean counter and look at exactly how much this and how much money that, but the fundamental question is what you're doing actually making a difference? Is it having a tangible deterrence or support or positive standing impact in a real way in the folks standing around a barbecue, in the everyday lives of Latvians, certainly, all the other Baltic states, people around the world that are receiving the impacts of NATO don't just benefit from the security elements of it, but benefit from this story we are telling, that democracies matter, that our values, our principles matter, and we stand together yes, embracing the differences and the different perspectives across our 29 members in little ways, but on the big things, we remain committed to protecting and supporting democratic values and principles around the world. More important now than ever before, and not just symbols. Thank you.
Very powerful. We have just about 4 minutes left, and there were lots and lots of hands. I'm just going to take the last two together and pair older generation and younger generation. So you, and then we're going to come to the front row. Yes.
Thank you. Stefano Stefanini, Atlantic Council. My question, Prime Minister Trudeau, is a follow-up to what you just said. Canada has participated in every single NATO operation or deployment. Do you think that Canada has carried more than its share of the burden, if not in expenses, in blood and treasure? And how do you explain it to your barbecue people that it was worth it, the price they paid, especially in blood?
Mm-hmm. And just let's grab this real quick.
Thank you. Rikas from Latvia, Member of Parliament. Thank you, Prime Minister, for a very passionate answer about values. There's no doubt we share them. But I was thinking of another ingredient that unites us all together is a common memory. And this is something that we see in Europe that divides member states. That also we can see it in the NATO, that we lack common memory, the memory from 20th century, and also the recent memory for the last 2 decades in 21st century. And that is something I would just love to hear how it would bring and shape, the understanding. And understanding only comes when we have shared values and also the memory. Thank you.
Thank you. Two great questions. First of all, has Canada done more than its share? No. Canada has done its share. We do what we feel is right, and we don't think about share. We don't think about who's doing more, who's doing less. We will do what we can and what we feel is right. I mean, Canada stepped up consistently in Europe in 2 world wars. We have a tradition of understanding that Canadians are lucky to be where we are geographically in the world, and that with that luck comes a responsibility to reach out and do what we can to make the world a better place. And that's why there are millions of Canadians around the world, and NGOs and organizations very much engaged with the international community in trying to contribute, trying to shape a better world, because not just out of altruism, but because we know very much that if we can help provide some answers to how to build more resilient societies, stable, peaceful democracies in the 21st century, then it's better for everyone. Economically, but also in terms of tangible lives. We are proud of having stepped up on the trenches of World War I, the beaches of World War II, and in international peacekeeping and NATO elements. It's a sense of who we are as Canadians, and we will always look for more opportunities to do that, and we'll always look for how we can best help. We're not the biggest country, we don't have the deepest pockets, but there are things that Canadians do as well, if not slightly better than anyone else in the world, and we will always be ready to help shape and contribute that, because we know that sharing our solutions and what we've done well can often help other people figure out, well, what will work for them. And that sense of shared responsibility is something that Canada has deeply, perhaps because we draw people from everywhere around the world and continue to, but also because we know that we have a responsibility to do what we can to create a better world. And a big part of it, to flow into that, is understanding the mistakes and the challenges of the past. Canada has just celebrated its 150th birthday last year. But at the same time, because our country is the one that has figured out better than anyone else that diversity is a source of strength, not a source of weakness, that it's about resilience. We have learned from people who come to Canada everywhere around the world, whether it's Afghan refugees, whether it's Syrian refugees recently, or whether it's some of the previous generations of people fleeing from Uganda in the Idi Amin years, boat people from Vietnam, or the wave of migrations we got in the post-World War II years from Europe. We understand tangibly how things could be worse and where things have been bad around the world. And being able to remember that or reflect on how we can do better, how we can create a society that is based around values and not identity, based around principles and rights and opportunity, real and fair chances for everyone to succeed. Those kinds of principles, I think, are going to be extraordinarily important in the 21st century. As we get flows of migrations, of people looking for better lives, people fleeing resource depletion, environmental calamities, and conflicts, we have to start thinking about how we create societies that look at different stories as opportunities to learn and grow within your societies rather than trying to keep the challenges or the world outside of your borders. And that reflection on how to be open and stronger because of that openness and resilience is, I think, something that NATO and indeed our sort of collective developed world is going to have to grapple with in a more and more real way, and not just in an intellectual think tank way, with all due respect to everyone in this room, but in a tangible way. How do we make ordinary folks who are going through living their lives, not thinking a lot about politics or international conflicts, but how do we get ordinary folks to understand that resilient, diverse communities is a better outcome, that being there to support your neighbor makes you better and creates more opportunities for you as well, that yes, being engaged on the far side of the world to rebuild a broken state is actually in your best interest. And yes, we need to take care of the poverty and the challenges we have at home, each of us. But we also have to look at what we do to alleviate stress, tensions, misery around the world, because if we don't, the trend lines we'll be on as a world will leave us all poorer off in every different way. So this sense of collective responsibility, we've figured out, NATO countries, a pretty good model of how to support citizens, how to create strong governance with freedom, with security, with all those things. And it's under stress right now. It's under tension from people who are anxious about where their paychecks are going to come from, where their kids' jobs are going to come from. And our responsibility is not to enhance or exaggerate or profit from those anxieties out there. Our responsibility is to allay those fears, to tell people, look, we have faced down massive challenges as a world in the past, and we did it by coming together and standing side by side for what we knew was right. We can again, and we need to again do that. Recognize that the rise of populism, of aggressive nationalism, of polarization in our public discourse in Canada and elsewhere around the world needs to be responded to with strong, confident, positive, rational messages about how we can solve these challenges together. And there is no better example of that than the extraordinary success that NATO has had over the past almost 70 years, and indeed will continue to have in a way that is more relevant today than it ever has been before. Merci beaucoup.
So I think we actually don't need a coffee break, because I think we got shots of inspiration from all three of you that will keep us going over the next 2 days. But I think the resolve and commitment that all three of you showed to the NATO alliance is what we're hoping will come out of the summit overall. But Mr. Prime Minister, the comment you made about we can articulate what our interests are and what our values are, but that only matters if we stand up to support and defend them. And that's really what we mean by NATO Engages. And so I think that idea of standing up for things we believe in is also a really powerful one. I want to ask you to join me in thanking our dream team from Canada, but I also want to ask you to please stay seated and allow them to leave the room, because as you can imagine, they're on a very tight schedule. But please do join me in thanking the Prime Minister.